Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning from wherever you are calling in. We're really happy that you're here with us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I realize we are 1 minute after the hour and your time is very valuable. So we're going to get started. But really, again, happy to have you all here. My name is Jess Dalpe. We'll do some introductions in just a moment. But glad that you're here to join us for part one of this two-part series on supporting children and families from Afghanistan. If you have not signed up for part two at this time, we will provide the registration link in the chat for you, just so that you can register if you're interested. It will be scheduled on May 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern time, so the same time slot. Before we kind of jump into the content, which we will do very shortly, I want to do a quick orientation to Zoom. I'm sure you all have been on Zoom many times before, but just to make sure that we remember what we can use. And then we'll do an overview of our learning objectives and introductions for the speakers today. So just as a reminder, hopefully you are all set. You can use the audio settings button to switch your audio between your computer or phone at any time using that audio settings button in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. You can also open the chat window by clicking on the chat bubble icon, which is located to the right center of your screen. And if you're typing something, please make sure to send it to all panelists and attendees so that everyone can read and respond to comments. Finally, you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or if you'd like to be taken off mute. We would love to hear from you, so please feel free to use that hand function. We will have a Q&A section at the end and look forward to answering your questions, which you can ask by using the Q&A box also at the bottom of your screen. So you can type your questions there, which I saw we already had a question. Yes, we are recording, and we will make sure to send this recording out. You can also click the thumbs up icon in the Q&A to upvote another participant's question. And last but not least, you should be able to turn on closed captions by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And then you can also choose how you would like to see that. Now that we've covered all of those pieces, and we're glad that you're all here and hopefully using all the different functions within Zoom, I'd like to go over our learning objectives for the day. We have 3 objectives today that we hope to achieve in this hour that we have together. We're really hoping that in this time that you all will feel comfortable walking away with understanding how the evolving nature of displacement and integration for Afghan children and families may impact family stability, to improve your knowledge about the experience of temporary displacement in the U.S. bases for Afghan children and families, and finally, to increase your awareness and knowledge on the strengths and resources Afghan individuals and families have and how services can support these resilient capabilities. We're going to start talking about that today, and then we will go into more detail in part 2 of this training series. Great. And so we have wonderful speakers today and a wonderful team supporting us. Really pleased to introduce Beth Farmer, who is one of our speakers today. She's a licensed clinical social worker with more than 3 decades of experience providing services to people who have experienced trauma. In the last 15 years, Beth has developed and directed programs for refugees, asylum seekers, and others who have been forcibly displaced. She currently directs the Safety, Education, and Wellness Technical Unit for the International Rescue Committee's Resettlement, Asylum, and Integration Department, and she's the principal investigator for CARE, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Beth is joining us from Seattle, Washington. Also incredibly excited to introduce Gul Hussain Shinwari, who came to the United States in October of 2016 through the Special Immigrant Visa Program and was supported by an affiliate of LIRS. Shinwari has 13 years of experience working in project management, monitoring and evaluation, program design and development with the UN Nations Development Program, as well as the Department for International Development and USAID funded projects. He's led and managed large multi-donor funded projects and developed partnerships with government counterparts, donors, and other stakeholders. Most recently, he worked as a program assistant and interpreter for Operation Allies Welcome in Fort Dix before joining the IRC team as the senior program officer for the Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. He currently works from his home in Northern Virginia, where he's calling in from today. And then you'll get to hear a little bit more from me. I'm Jess Dalpe. I'm a licensed social worker with over a decade of experience working in international social work, focusing on generating and integrating evidence-based practices related to gender-based violence and mental health and psychosocial support for refugees, asylum seekers, and other immigrants in the US who have faced forced displacement. I currently work as the Senior Technical Advisor for Safety and Wellness at the International Rescue Committee, and I'm the Program Director for CARE, the Center for Adjustment, Resilience, and Recovery. I'm calling in from coastal New Jersey over on the East Coast. We also have Giuseppe Mercuri and Mara Maserani assisting us with technical functions today. So you might see them pop into the chat. Giuseppe is CARE's administrative assistant and Marwa is our M&E officer. Really, really happy to have everybody on today. Okay, last piece, and then I will pass it off. But you're all probably wondering, I've mentioned IRC and CARE, probably wondering, what is this? So just a little bit about who we are and why we're putting this webinar together and this series together. So IRC, or the International Rescue Committee, is an international humanitarian organization operating in more than 40 countries and 26 US cities. Since 1933, our mission has been to help people whose lives and livelihoods are shattered by conflict and disaster to survive, recover, and gain control of their future. In the US, we act as a refugee resettlement agency, as well as a community-based organization, offering a wide array of services, including, but definitely not limited to, job coaching and employment assistance, cultural orientation, English language learning classes, medical case management, legal assistance, and much, much more. Many of the clients that IRC serves, whether they are resettled refugees, asylum seekers, unaccompanied children, or trafficking survivors, often need mental health and psychosocial support to help manage traumatic and toxic stress, uncertainty, grief and loss, cultural marginalization, and much more. However, what we found is that it was often hard to connect people with the help that they needed. This was for many reasons, right? Including stigma, a lack of culturally responsive providers, lack of language access, and mental health providers not understanding the very complex process of forced displacement. On the other side of that, right, the people who are most likely to see forcibly displaced populations, those specialty providers like resettlement agencies and ethnic community-based organizations, often don't have the knowledge and skills to practice in a trauma-informed way in all that we do. So the project that we have, the Center for Adjustment, Resilience, and Recovery, we have our sole aim is to bridge between these agencies that specialize in serving forcibly displaced populations and mental health providers and traumatic stress experts, so that through our shared knowledge and our collaboration, more children and families who have experienced forced displacement can get the supports that they need to heal, adjust, and thrive. So that's really what our center, or CARE, does, and that's what we're hoping to do, is provide those connections. If you'd like more information about us and what we do, please feel free to reach out to any one of us on the panelists. You can also email us at care, C-A-R-R-E, @rescue.org. But enough about that. I'd like to pass it off to Beth to get us into the content for today, really setting the stage and understanding the context and Operation Allies Welcome. So Beth, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you, Jess. And if you can go to the next slide. I'm going to start here with a brief and really insufficient to the rich and multi-layered history of Afghanistan and its people, because many people on this call will be working across cultures like I do. And of course, no one has just one culture. Each of us is made up of many cultures. For me, and white and American born and female and cisgender, plus a bunch of different things. But often when we're working with our own culture, we have deep experience within that culture. We have met many different types of people from our own culture, many different family structures, temperaments, beliefs, etc. And this prevents us from seeing people in a flat and one-dimensional way. But when we work across cultures, there is quite a danger that our only view is informed and biased by things that we hear in the media and in politics. And so we really have to guard against that as providers. So I wanted to take a moment here to just recognize that Afghanistan, its people and its history is very complex, it's rich and extremely varied. Geographically, it has always been strategic and it is active. And because of this, it's often experienced foreign intervention or interference. In somewhat recent history, there were multiple British invasions and wars that were fought at the turn of the century and well into the 20th century. And after a brief period, sorry, I'm hearing my connection is cutting in and out, so I'm going to try to switch to a different connection.
I think we can hear you fine now, Beth. You just cut out for a second. Please continue.
Okay.
We'll let you know if it does cut in and out more.
Thank you so much, and sorry about that. I think I was starting on the talking about the different foreign interference. In somewhat recent history, between the 19th and into the early 20th century, there were multiple British invasions and wars fought for the land that is now called Afghanistan. And more recently, in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and started a brutal 10-year war. At the time, the US was involved, backing the Mujahideen, which later became the Taliban. And the Taliban also ruled the country in 1996 until the US-led invasion started in 2001. You can go to the next slide. The war, which just ended, lasted 20 years. And throughout this war, it's important to note that the US recruited numerous bilingual, bicultural Afghans who worked for the US Armed Forces. And because of their work, many were threatened and in danger. And so in 2006, the US developed a program called the Special Immigrant Visa Program, also known as SIV. And through this, tens of thousands of SIVs and their families have settled in the US. However, many people working for the US government were not able to come, either because there was very slow processing or because they were working for US contractors or non-governmental organizations. So we can go to the next slide. So fast forward to August of 2021. When the US-led forces withdrew, there was an expectation at that time that the Taliban would control some parts of the country, but many people didn't expect that they would control Kabul, or at least not immediately. So when it fell so quickly, it caught many Afghans and the US off guard and led to really a mass scramble to start evacuating allies, SIVs and their families that we spoke about. However, there wasn't really a process in place to quickly get out SIVs, much less other people who had worked for US contractors or NGOs, and then other people like women's rights activists who would be targeted by the Taliban. And all of this led to really a mass scramble and chaos to get out of the country. And simultaneously, while people were being evacuated, at the exact same time that people were being evacuated, the US government was trying to figure out
what to do with the people it was evacuating, how to process them, where would they go, what would happen next. It was said over and over during this whole process that we were truly building the plane while we were flying it, but it was absolutely true. Within days, 8 military bases that were deemed safe havens started receiving evacuees. However, it took weeks before a basic structure was in place to receive people, and months before more comprehensive systems were worked out. And this led, especially initially, to a lot of frustration and misunderstandings. And so that's a little bit about the background and history. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shinwari to talk about the bases, what happened there, the safe havens, and also what happened next within the APA program.
Thank you, Beth. Before coming to talking about bases, I would like to start a little bit thinking about starting from Afghanistan, how these people were brought up from Afghanistan and how the government collapsed. I will not go in more details, but I will give you a little bit background so that you can better understand starting all those people from Kabul ending up here in the United States. Usually in Afghanistan, the war season usually starts in May, June, July. So Taliban, those are the months where Taliban intensifies their fighting against the government officials and also against the international community. And the last 2021, June 2021, the fighting intensified, particularly in remote provinces, on those people who used to live in Kabul. Like for them, it was a kind of ordinary thing because even in the Kabul city, there was suddenly an explosion and it was a kind of routine. It wasn't a big surprise for them because then it turns into a kind of routine things like at least once in a week, there would be explosion, there would be attack by Taliban or anti-government elements against the government contractors or some of the embassies. So, and when it gets closer to August, some of the districts we called in Afghanistan, we call them district, which could be resembled here into county here in the United States. It fall into Taliban, and we thought it is something ordinary that has been happening in the past couple of years. So particularly those people who used to live in Kabul, for them it was not something new. And there was no worry about falling those counties or districts into the hands of Taliban. But when a province, we call in Afghanistan province, in here we call it states, some of the provinces falls to Taliban, then it increased a little bit worried that they capture some of the provinces. In the past, Taliban had also captured 1 or 2 provinces, but then it was really difficult for them to maintain it, to keep with them. But this time they kept some of the provinces, and over the time they were gaining more control on the geography of Afghanistan. But as rightly Beth said earlier, it was not expected that Kabul or the entire government architecture will collapse as soon. And in August, early morning, I will just share a little bit my story with you so that you can see, like in August 15, early morning, like on 14 of August, I received call from different colleagues who used to live here in the United States. They were telling me that you need to get out of the country as soon as possible. But I tried my best. I bought many tickets, but it got canceled because all those international airlines were canceling their flights from Afghanistan. But during early morning on 15 of August, I went outside to the city. There were still people a little bit worried about it. And we heard from the people the Taliban have reached out to the borders of Kabul. The entire country was collapsed and everyone was worried. And there was also discussions going on that it has been discussed with Taliban that they will not enter to the Kabul and they will remain outside of the Kabul. And it has been agreed with them. It was giving a little bit hope to the people, but still, and when it comes to 10:30 in the morning, I was outside to get some of my blood test so that I can show up on the airplane that I got vaccinated so that I could be allowed to sit on the plane to have the COVID vaccine shot and all those things. While I was on way back to home, on the way, so I heard lots of gunshots and people start running across the streets. And when we asked what happened, then they said Taliban came. So everyone was packing and everyone was running from one place to another place. And some of the government officials, they were on the government cars and they had also no options. Some of them just leave their car right on the roads and just run away, get off their cars and just run away. And it congested the entire road. So some people did not know where to go now. So it created lots of anxiety and pressures. And I also witnessed the vehicle of the vice president of Afghanistan crossing across where I used to live on that road. So it was getting more intensified, the situations, and people were worrying about. Then what happened next? So people were trying to rush to the airport, but then it was also not easier for people to go to the airport because on the way they might be checked, and Taliban showed up everywhere on the roads, and there were lots of slogans from the Taliban. So it was also difficult for people to go to the airport. And when you go to even to the airport, there was no plane other than those military aircrafts, where everyone was not allowed at the beginning, and no one knew that they would be allowed to get on those airplanes. But some people managed to get into the airport, and those people who had served and worked closely with the US Army, they were somehow able, because they had some of the aircrafts, particularly helicopter or choppers, they were able to land inside the airport. And airport was the only place which was with the American forces and its allies. Other than the entire Kabul was captured, and the entire country was captured under the control of Taliban. And now it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was really difficult for everyone to go to the airport or to reach to the airport. For example, I will take my own example. If I wanted to go to airport, I was worried that maybe I will be checked in one of the checkpoints and I will be asked who I am, and they might find some things, maybe some documents, and I might be killed. So same applies to other government officials, in particular for those contractors. Anyhow, finally, I was able to manage and get on the military aircrafts after 3 days, and then came to the Qatar along with lots of Afghan colleagues. And can we go to the next slide? And those colleagues, it was a combination of different diverse group of people. So it included lots of senior government officials, like it included the governors. I met with some of the governors, and I also met with some of my counterparts, including the Deputy Minister of Interior Affairs. We also call it Home Ministry. And there were also lots of those special force peoples and their families who have fought along with the American soldiers, and they were the ones who were conducting special operation raids, night raids, and they were helping the US armies, and their family were there. There were also some of the people who had never been to even to Kabul, and they were coming from the remote provinces because they had heard it. US Army and people are going to US and they are going to Europe. So everyone was trying just to get on the military aircrafts. And as I mentioned earlier, it was not easier, but US Army, they tried their best to identify the right people, particularly those people whose life is really in danger. But at the same time, some people also managed to get on those planes and came to the United States. So when they came from Kabul, they first went to the Qatar, and then from the Qatar, they came to United States and some of those military camp and what we also call the safe havens. When they came to the safe havens, they got a little bit relieved because they went through a lot. It's a lot to share, but since the shortage of time, I will not go into more details. But I will share my experience on those military safe havens, like what happened when those people arrived. Can we move to the next slides? And those safe havens, when people arrived on the safe havens, they had gone through lots of difficulties because of this trauma that they went through the collapse of the entire government. Some of the family members lost lots of their loved ones. Some of them had lost their family members. And some of them, not only in this recent incident, like for the past couple of years, I would say like at least one of their family members have lost their life in this 20 years or more than 20 years of fightings. And some of the women were there who had no husband, their husband was left behind, their children were left behind, and some of the children were there where their parents were left behind and they didn't know where to go and what to process and what kind of documents do they need. But luckily, when they arrived to those safe havens, the good thing what the U.S. military did, that they processed their documents. Even some of them did not have the national ID card. They did not have their passport, but yet they were entered into the system and give them some sort of documentations. So they got a kind of relief that yes, they are being accepted here and their document will be processed and they will be safe and they will be not sent back to Afghanistan, because they were also worried in their mind that maybe they will be deported or maybe they will be sent to some of the African countries, because some of the African countries had announced that they are willing to give some place to the Afghan peoples who have displaced. So they say that even those countries might be even worse than Afghanistan, because some of those African countries, there is also fighting is going on. So they were worried that we will end up with another Afghanistan. But when their document processed, somehow they feel a little kind of relieved and feel a kind of hope for the settling in here in the United States. Then one another thing which I noticed in those safe havens, they got medical care. For example, if someone gets sick, there was temporary medical points where they could go and can get treated, and those who are needed like a serious medical complication, they were sent to the nearest hospital so that they can be taken care of. Besides that, they were also getting very good food, and particularly they were providing halal foods for Afghans, which is very important for them. Like they mostly eat halal food, and the US military luckily generously provided the halal food to all those colleagues. But as the situation was evolving, like the food which was provided here in the safe haven, it was not provided in the Qatar. It was not intentional because, as Beth rightly said, it was everything such a sudden. They did not have any time to do a proper planning and to make all those logistic arrangements. Besides that, on those safe havens, they also provided some educational opportunity. It was not like a very extended educational opportunity, but there were some classes for them to learn the basic English, like how to greet in English and to know some of the basic needs of their lives. So they also managed that for them and also created some recreational opportunity for them. Sometimes they were bringing up Afghan famous musicians for them to entertain them. So they provided all those good services in those safe havens. Can we go to the next slide? Beside all those good services which were provided in those safe havens to Afghan colleagues, there were some challenges in those safe havens as well. And one of them would be like the highest number of the Afghan parolee. For example, in one of the military or what we call the safe haven, there were over 13,000 of Afghan parolee in the one safe havens. Beside them, there were also the system were not, I would say, it's a kind of robust system in place so that everything could be tracked down from beginning till the end. And every day the system was changing and evolving in new policies and a kind of new requirements were coming up. Besides it, there were lots of error in the documentations while processing the documents of those Afghan parolee. For example, some of the example I will give you, some of the clients, their name were misspelled. And when they received document from the Hummingbird, which was the website of the USCIS, they were really worried about like saying that my name is misspelled, this is not my name, what will happen to my case if I want to apply for my asylum, will it delay my process and all those things. Similarly, like in the date of birth, there were lots of mistakes. One of the child I remember, he had 3 different date of births. He was real 80 years old, but in one paper, he was 5 years old. On the another, he was 8-year-old. And on the another vaccination card, he was 13-year-old. And his grandfather was really worried about his documentations. Like he said that when he gets his documentation, what will happen, which date of birth it will be. So there were lots of mistakes, and it was making some worried about making the clients worried about getting future documentations and how to get it and how to fix all those mistakes. Besides it, there were also not a well coordinated approach among lots of agencies there. Like there were lots of resettlement agencies there. There was also IUM, there was also Department of Homeland Securities. So whenever some of the documents processed from the one agencies, and then it was the responsibility of another agencies, they were saying, no, it is not our task, go to another. I will give you an example, then you will better understand. For example, some of the documents of the clients were processed through the processing units. And after processing their documents, it includes like registering into the Hummingbird. And then it was once they are registered, they need to go to the medical checkups. And when their medical checkup is done, then they are supposed to be relocated to some of the states. So when their entire document process, they were told that once your documents are processed and get entered into a system, then we will make arrangements for you to be transferred or to be deployed to one of your nearest US ties. So when their document were processed, then they were going to IUM, International Organization for Migrations. They were saying, no, it is not our responsibility. Perhaps you should look to the Department of Homeland Security. Once we get signal from them, then we will be able to take you to your desired destinations. And whenever they were going to another department, they were saying, no, it is not our responsibility. Perhaps you should go to XYZ. So it was a lot of panicking inside there. Thirdly, there was lots of misinformations and a lot of expectations of the clients. The clients were thinking like, when we get to the US, everything will be very straightforward and we will be able to have a luxury house like the life they have seen on the movies. There is totally different in the reality when you come to the United States. And similarly, they had some of the relatives who used to live in the different parts of the world, like some of the European countries, like the types of benefits they are receiving in Europe, that is different than they are receiving in the United States. So they were expecting a lot. They were thinking that they could get the permanent housing, like as soon as they get there, everything will be smooth and they will easily get all those benefits. And thirdly, the clients were asking each and everyone how much assistance they will get, what kind of benefit they will receive. All the people did not have the correct information, so everyone was saying something to them. And later on, when they came to the program, which is the EPA program, later on I will be talking about it, then the reality was different. So what they have heard on those safe haven, that is totally different on when they came to get enrolled into the Afghan Placement and Assistance program. Can we go to the next slide? Next one. The EPA services. So when those people were transferred or taken from those safe havens and were brought out to the resettlement agencies, there was a shortage of permanent housing. So they keep them in temporary housing, particularly in hotels, where those resettlement agency provided their services as per the EPA program, Afghan Placement and Assistance Program. The whole purpose of this Afghan Placement and Assistance Program was and is to help these refugees or Afghan parolees and to help them in this transition period into a system to reintegrate in this new community. In a long term, also to help them to be self-sufficient financially and economically so that they do not no longer rely on the government services. Through this program, they are providing the basic services, like the program initially was planned to provide services from 30 to 90 days, but in practice, when we start working on them, those services could hardly be provided within 30 days. So it is realistically, it takes 90 or even more than 90 days to deliver those services. And those services includes processing the application for the public benefits like food stamp, temporary cash assistance program, enrolling their kids into the school, providing housings like and another thing would be like enrolling a children in school and also help them to get them employed or also refer them to some of those educational services where they can learn and then they can utilize those educations what they have learned and to get a better job for them. So this is the overall umbrella PPA program which we have been serving them. But yet there are also some challenges that Afghan clients and colleagues have been facing. Can we move to the next slide? So some of those challenges, as I mentioned earlier, is the temporary housings. Overall, if we look across all those resettlement agencies, they have been struggling to find the permanent housing for all Afghan clients. So for the temporary purpose, they have kept them in the temporary housing. But luckily, as per the recent data and statistics, which I have looked into, overall 80% of people are now in permanent housing. But this was not the case like 3-4 months ago, because 3-4 months ago, most of the people were in the temporary housing. But now the latest statistics which I have received, 80% people are now in the permanent housing. So housing was also has been one of the very big challenge. Besides that, there was also some of the RAs were shortage of staff. There was not lots of number of staff so that they can reach out and handle all the cases of the clients. Besides that, there was also COVID-19 and the staff was working remotely while the services, some of the services were required in person because you need to interact in face-to-face some of the clients. And it is sometimes very difficult and they get a different feelings when you talk to someone remotely, virtually versus you're meeting someone in person and explaining everything, particularly those people in those clients who have never been in US and those who have recently arrived here in US and explaining everything. They need a lot of face-to-face interactions, counseling. So this has also been one of the challenges. And another challenge was processing their document. For example, we have submitted application for the client to process their document for their food stamp card and for also for their medical insurance and for the work authorization cards. Sometimes it get lost and sometimes it takes few months while they have been impatiently waiting for them. And one of the main concerns which still exists is the worried about their future status and processing their legal and immigration documents. So this has been also some of the challenges under APA program and the opportunities under APA program in the current status comparing to bringing them from the safe havens to through the APA programs. Some of those opportunities like now they can freely move, like they are not confined only to those temporary housing in hotels. Some of them can visit their relative where they live nearby, and sometimes their relative visiting them so that they can meet their relatives. And so it gives them a kind of peace of mind. Another thing is some of them have also started processing their documents of adjustment documents and the resettlement documents. Some of them have already processed it. And some of them have already got jobs opportunities and they have started working here in the United States. So it's with the passage of time, it's getting better, but I would say like the hard time has gone now and it's getting better day by day. Like as I stated earlier, it was really difficult for them to have them in a permanent housing. Similarly, enrollment of their children into a school, it has been also one of the challenges, particularly if the client is living in the temporary housing and you want to enroll them in a school, it was also challenging because some of the schools were not accepting the clients who does not have a permanent address. And transportations was also an issue from the school to the hotel because every school got their own specific routes for pickup and drop of the children, and they don't have any specific routes towards the hotels. And the clients in the hotel, they don't have their own car to pick up and drop off their children. But now, since the people are mostly moving to the permanent housing, their kids are mostly enrolled in the schools and they are settling back. So these were just few things from my side, and if you have any question, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Shinwari. It's incredibly helpful and just eye-opening to hear both your personal experiences and reflections, and then also your experience in supporting this incredibly complex program given the context. So we're going to move to kind of the last short section that I will talk a little bit about around the impact of migration on children and families, and then we'll go into Q&A. But thanks so much, Shinwari, and look forward to hearing from you more when we get those Q&A in. But without further ado, I wanted to talk just a little bit, around the impact of migration on families and children, and what we're seeing, So thinking about all of that uncertainty that Shinwari had shared, in this process, from the military bases or safe havens, as they were called, to the APA program, The lack of documentation, the delay in being able to get housing, in being able to enroll children in school and find that sense of normalcy, find that sense of stability, and all of the ensuing lack of capacity in such a very quickly thrown together response. So to center us kind of in this arc, or actually a circle that we're seeing here of crisis. So when we think about migration and forced displacement, we often will think of that initial crisis, which is that kind of immediate kind of safety concerns that Beth and Shinwari had both talked about, The disruption, as Shinwari was saying, some of this felt normal, and then all of a sudden there was that moment, I think you were saying on August 14th and 15th, of when things didn't feel normal, And what happens in that initial crisis and internal displacement are kind of seeing things like the erosion of structures and supports and systems that usually provide support to families and children, So schooling, so the normal day-to-day activities, family and community connections. And then we see internal displacement, which has the protective factors of cultural and linguistic congruence, So being displaced within the same community or country. However, we also see the social and economic supports decreasing because of that difference. As Shinwari had shared, some people had never been to Kabul. And so that in and of itself was a whole new experience, let alone getting on a military plane and fleeing a country. We see scarcity, in that process of fleeing and being forcibly displaced, the lack of resources, lack of basic needs, which is followed by separation, impermanence, and uncertainty. So as I mentioned, that continued arc of uncertainty that we see, and how that impacts an internal sense of safety based on the external circumstances. Then as we're looking at this arc of crisis, kind of continuing to migration, resettlement, and integration, we often see things such as hope, because there is, as Shinwari said, hope, but also exhaustion in that process of maybe we're finding safety and stability, but also then navigating really complex systems, as I think everyone on this call knows really well, So having to retell trauma histories and narratives for access to safety and security, And then through that resettlement and integration, as we're looking at like the APA program, for example, there are kind of the potential for an access to some sense of permanency, right? So a sense of creating a home. However, this is impacted by things such as immigration pathways. And what we know about this program in particular is that the immigration pathway right now is through kind of other forms of immigration, such as asylum or family petitions. So really knowing that there's still that continued sense of uncertainty and fear that permeates this experience. And then this also kind of loops back to this crisis, which is why we have a circle, right? Because this process of integration, as I think many people on this call can attest to, is not a linear process. It's not one where kind of everything kind of always goes up and feels better, but that there are these loops, right? So loops of crises, so future generations and generational tension, right? And cultural tension between young children, teenagers, adults, and older adults, and looking at that process of integrating into schools, integrating into daycares and the workforce, and the different stressors that that places on different members within families and communities. Looking at different life stages, such as what it looks like to have a child here in the US and to raise a child in the US. I think Shinwari had mentioned there were many, we've seen many children who were born in the process of being on the bases. And so what does it look like to raise a child for families in a new community, in a setting of such uncertainty, but also within that hope? And so what we are thinking about within this kind of cycle that we see of crisis and this arc of crisis are the little opportunities for stabilization, for support, and for mental health and psychosocial support programming to be able to account for both the stage that the family is in within the arc of crisis, but also the state of the family and the children in that actual moment. And so before we move on to questions and answers, because I know we have a few that have come in, I do want to talk a little bit about, right, as we're thinking about the impact of migration, of forced displacement on children and families, also thinking about the importance of recognizing the strengths and capacities that are present and how we as service providers can help Afghan families, all of our clients that we serve, tap into those strengths and capacities by understanding what families have already been doing and considering how we can work together to actively strengthen them, right? So looking at things like natural temperament and personality traits, such as perseverance, right? Recognizing that the Afghans that we are supporting at this moment and that we have been supporting through other programming have taken dramatic steps to find safety, and that there's an internal reserve of perseverance and resourcefulness that they each have. Right? This will look different for each child and each family, and can include things such as capacity, skills, and knowledge, right? So our role as providers is to directly and explicitly recognize those ways in which people have been protecting themselves and others, as well as the skills that they've used to do this. Right? This can include skills such as advocacy for resources, services, and support. So being able to acknowledge the hardship, the impact of this experience, and also these strengths and capacities. And finally, we also want to look at protective factors and actions that are present, right? So this includes things such as having a large community with which the current Afghan arrivals have been with through this process, right? We've heard from colleagues that some families have even been hesitant to leave hotels because they've found a sense of community and support within that experience. So wanting that permanency and also wanting to have that connection. So our job as providers is to continue to help make connections, to help reduce that sense of isolation caused by all of this uncertainty, all of these disruptions to what's normal, and to increase access to resources and access to services. And this can look as simple as having recreational supports such as coffee and tea rituals, games, and a reestablishment of educational activities for families and children to recreate that sense of normalcy and connection. Again, we'll go into much more detail on what we can do in practice in part 2 of this series, but wanted to just have that moment to really center us in what that arc of crisis looks like in relation to responding and supporting to our Afghan families and children, and also to really acknowledge the strengths and capacities and resiliencies in this work. And so I want to take the remaining 10 minutes or so to be able to answer some questions. I see we have some in the chat, and we also have in the Q&A, but I know Giuseppe is going to be able to support us with that.
Yes, hi everyone. I am a care administrative assistant. We have a question for the panelists while we're waiting for other questions in the Q&A. The first one is, knowing this was such a chaotic and difficult experience, what is most important for providers to consider in creating trusting relationship with Afghan clients? If someone from the panel wants to reply.
Shinwari, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The first thing for building the trust is explaining the programs and all those services that you are providing very explicitly, and stop setting expectations. Clear information is always the key. Explaining everything at the beginning, and do not ever let any expectations that we cannot fulfill and we cannot meet and we are not 100% sure about it. And another thing is the regular communications, keeping them updated. Because one of the things is, even if you tell them that X thing is Y, like X thing will happen, X, Y, Z, still they need to be updated. Like, they have been very impatiently waiting for the status because they're very eagerly looking to step forward. So they are very, like, sometimes they have not been properly being communicated and not reaching out to the providers. They are not able to reach out to the providers. It could be a language barrier. It could be, like, as we said, virtual services that we are providing. But the more in person, if possible, to the extent possible, it would be good, like, if there is a kind of focal point who could regularly keep them updated, that would be the good things.
Yeah, I would just say time, and also being able to repeat things multiple times, and being very patient with that, because there's a lot that people have to understand. And also with stress and past trauma and worries about being separated from loved ones, it doesn't always get absorbed and processed. So I think that patience. I see another question in the chat about the unaccompanied children's experience, and I just quickly will say that there was about 1,500 unaccompanied Afghan minors that came as part of the evacuation. And in a call I was on last week, there are still about 170 that are in the Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters. Sangeeta, it is a deep and complex topic. And I think you bring up a really good point when children have been separated from their family, even if they are with sponsors here or with distant family members or older siblings who are of majority age. Their experience does look a little bit different and is much more complex. And for the children who are in the shelters, it's even more difficult and more complex, because when they will leave and who they will go to is still very unknown. So I think you've got all your normal developmental stuff, Then you've got the grief and loss from being separated. You've got the uncertainty about will you be reunited. You've got the worries about your caregivers, and you may be trying to fit into the shelter system or within a new host or sponsoring family. So it is very, very complicated and worthy of its own. We do have some technical advisors specifically for unaccompanied children that have been working very deeply with unaccompanied Afghan minors. And if people are working with that population and would like to have some technical assistance in kind of a deeper dive into that area, just write us at care@rescue.org, because it really is worthy of many hours of its own support. And to that question for about how they can get legal guardianship. Yes, even with sponsors, they do not have legal guardianship yet, which can deeply complicate things. And I would be happy if you want to, Violetta, if you want to write us at CARE, I can send you some of our guidance on that and how that works.
We have a few other questions. Oh, go ahead, Giuseppe.
Yeah, there is a question in the Q&A from Patty. She would like to know if prior to arrival in the United States, there was a system in place in the military bases for refugees to receive health assessment or health screening.
Yeah, I was just, Jess, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I can jump in, then Beth, I'm sure you can add more. I would say yes and no. Yes, there are processes for screenings and health assessments, not in conjunction with the US military. This in many ways, as Beth and Shinwari had shared, was an unprecedented response, hence a lot of the difficulties and the barriers that were encountered. But yes, as part of kind of the initial reception and placement services for refugees who come through the traditional refugee pathway, there are initial health assessments and screenings that everyone receives through federally qualified health centers in communities. And then, of course, refugee resettlement providers ensure that families and communities are connected to ongoing medical care for any needs that may come up. But yeah, Beth or Shinwari, if you have anything you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, you rightly covered. Yes. So some of the initial health screening, like as you said, it was unprecedented response, and everything was not like no one was expecting it is going what is going to happen. Still, in the Qatar, they were providing initial health screening. They were providing initial vaccination shots. And also upon arrival here in some of the airports, there were system in place and they get vaccinated, and also on the military bases on the safe havens, they get full vaccinations like mumps, measles, tetanus, those kinds of vaccination.
Thanks, Shinwari. I think we're getting a number of questions coming in. I think there are two. Maybe we can try. I know we have just a minute left. Maybe we can try to answer. I think Lisa asked a really great question. Sorry, Giuseppe, but
Yeah,
why? Yeah, why we're saying parolees, and that's a great point. It does have a negative connotation. It can. It is an immigration status. So being, well, not a full status. It is a temporary status where essentially Afghan individuals and families are being paroled into the US. So it's a temporary status for 2 years. Shamar, you can definitely say more, but being given that kind of protected immigration ability to be in the US, and it's called parole. But yeah, Beth or Shinwari, feel free to jump in.
Yeah. So Afghan parole, it is usually the temporary status, and it is usually provided in crisis, particularly in those countries which they don't have any other places. So it is provided for them for 2 years, and during these 2 years, they can apply for the asylum, but it depends on the status, whether it will get asylum or not. Given the current situations, even in the Congress, there is an act going on, and lots of people are educating for it. And the act is so that they can get their status of adjustment without going through the asylum process, and they would get their permanent residency. It is under this discussions. It has not been approved yet. Besides that, there is also recently the Senate has passed a bill for 2 years protection status. So within 2 years, they are allowed, as in the current Afghan parole status, they are allowed to work and they can study, continue their educations, and they are free to go wherever they want to go within the countries, within the states. And up to 2 years, it will be decided. So within the 2 years, they are allowed to apply for their asylum. And there are also lots of pro bono, like the legal immigration attorneys. They are also helping them to file their cases for the asylum.
And just want to acknowledge that we are over time, so I imagine we're getting a lot of people who need to leave. But yeah, as Marwa said in the chat, please let us know any feedback that you have by filling out a brief survey that we put in the chat. And just want to thank everyone so much for spending this time with us today, for all of the work you're doing, and a huge thank you to my co-panelists and colleagues for your fantastic presentations and support. And yes, as Beth had put in the chat, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, send us your questions. We're here to help and connect you to services and supports. But thank you all, and we hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day and rest of your week.